Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss. Thank you so much for listening. This episode features Ron Lane, who retired as Superintendent of Agriculture for the UC Davis Environmental, Horticulture, and Plant Sciences departments to found Circadium Crop Sciences. During his academic experience, he became frustrated by the toxic effects of sulfur and copper in our wine and food crops, and began looking for safer and more effective alternatives. Ron has written several articles over the last few years with titles like Sulfur is not a pesticide and The use of sulfur in organic farming may be natural, but it's not harmless. And he has developed and tested a product that so far has not only been more effective as a fungicide than sulfur, but is as or more effective than any other fungicide, organic or otherwise, on the market. And also is non-toxic and may stimulate plant immune systems and has been tested as an effective control of other diseases like peach leaf curl, brown rot, fusarium, phomopsis, and others. His product is called All-Phase, and the active ingredients are potassium sorbate and carrageenan, two naturally occurring ingredients. The problem? It's not yet OMRI certified and approved for organic usage. Is that because it's not organic? Or because organic is slow to adapt and adopt new products unless there are large moneyed interests pushing for their desired changes? Is sulfur any more organic than potassium sorbate? What are the incentives and motivations around approving new organic products? Why do we have the organically allowed products that we currently have? What are the realities behind where sulfur comes from and what it becomes in the environment and its impact on human health? This episode may be the most literal exploration of Beyond Organic Wine that I've done, and I came away with so many more questions than I started with. I want to be clear that I'm not endorsing Ron's product, though I understand that this episode does unavoidably bring attention to it in a positive light. From what I can tell, it deserves this attention, but that doesn't mean I know everything there is to know about it. I welcome any feedback and input from anyone listening who thinks we've missed some important information. But I also think that looking at these questions is really important, whatever you might conclude about Ron's product. As someone who advocates for adaptation at every level of wine, I think that our organic standards and products must adapt as well. Do we need a new framework for qualifying as organic? Why is petroleum that we refine, distill, and filter and euphemistically call horticultural mineral oil allowed for organic use? If I advocate for anything, it's for using less of everything. But in the realm of organic viticulture, I think having more options that are safer and effective is beneficial for everyone. And I think Ron presents a really strong case not only for the safety and effectiveness of All-Phase, but for the need to consider alternatives to sulfur and copper. Enjoy. Ron, thanks for doing this. Welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Can you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Okay, so my name's Ron Lane, and I've been in agriculture a long time. It started out in the early 80s as a grower and did that for 8 years, and then went to UC Davis in the Plant Sciences department for 27 years. And then I started Circadian Crop Sciences and retired from the university. Uh, One of the things I was involved with quite a bit at UC Davis and for the College of Ag was agricultural safety.
Hmm.
And
That leads us.
I probably trained more people in agricultural safety than anyone in the history of the school. But I
Have you been like one of the people that gives people their what is it, the certification for spraying and stuff like that? Did
Well,
you?
I train people to spray. I'm
Uh-huh.
licensed to train people. So, we have people using our facilities. We can't just turn them loose.
Right,
We
right.
we have to give them the proper training, and it's not just pesticides. It's everything to do with their job. I mean, driving a tractor,
Right.
to
Right.
just if you're a field worker, there's things you have to know for minimizing your exposure to pesticides or other things that are just involved with your unique situation might have some things that need safety training. So Yeah, I mean, I got involved in a lot of stuff that wasn't really interesting to me too. I don't confined space safety training isn't all, all that fun for me. But anyways, in the course of doing safety, I would get a lot of feedback from farm workers and students and stuff. And, a couple of things that maybe they're not really crazy about was sulfur in working in fields, following sulfur applications, etc. Um,
Well,
and
yeah. I mean, this is so I want to jump right in and I'll prompt you a little bit here, but
yeah,
first I want to give a shout out to Austin Collins from Tobless Creek who sent me the first article that I read of yours, which has been a few months now, but he really piqued my interest, and I think things have intervened, but you've been on the back burner, and I've been looking, and then I've done some more reading of your stuff, and I think, the name of the article that I read was Sulfur is Not a Pesticide. And I think, I've now found that out there on the webs as well. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's a provocative title for some people, maybe. And I would love you to sort of break that down. First of all,
well,
and just, why'd you title, what's that about? What are you talking
well,
about?
I mean, I think people have a misconception about sulfur. I
Yeah.
think they see the organic approved or whatever, and the birds start tweeting and all that, and they think it's all harmony with nature and all this other stuff. One thing they might not realize is sulfur that you buy for agriculture is actually synthetic, and it is a byproduct of the petroleum industry. It's
Right.
exactly the same as elemental
Mind.
sulfur that
Right.
can be found in nature, but it is synthetic, and it was given an exemption by the National Organic Act to be included in organic cultivation. And copper sulfate was another, and other copper products were given an exemption, though they are synthetic. Um, and so people, they see organic and they immediately, their guard goes down, and they they tend to not treat it with the same respect that they might treat other pesticides that they would be working.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I definitely have done some, shirtless spraying of sulfur on my own vines. you know,
Well, yeah,
not
and
that like the shirt, not that having a shirt is a problem, but I have no PPE basically.
well, yeah.
But
So, and I used to wash the grease off my hands with gasoline when I was a kid. Uh, but
and then light a cigarette.
uh, well, I didn't go quite that far.
No, well, why is I mean, like, it's not like we're picking on sulfur, but there's some really good reason to think about sulfur. It's, I mean, if you can talk
Well,
about like why it's important
I think
in the scale that it's used and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's the scale. In pest control, we have a saying, it's the dose that makes the poison. And some things, like copper, for instance, are necessary, and sulfur, they're necessary for you to live. You have to have them,
Right.
you know? Um, but you have to have things at the right dosage. At one dosage, it gives you life. At another dosage, it's not so good for you. And the sulfur itself, it's pretty hard to get a high enough dosage for pure sulfur to be bad for you. But sulfur in the field, um, it vaporizes. It goes through a process called sublimation, where it goes directly from a solid to a gas. It's a sulfur ring that's a gas. And that gas then becomes oxidized,
Mm.
and it becomes sulfur dioxide. It can further get oxidized into other aerosols, but sulfur as itself isn't really what's doing the job for you.
So
And since
it's
there's so much sulfur applied, depending on the area, it could be a problem. And it's really not studied all that much. But there was a study done in the Salinas Valley, and it was done by UC Berkeley uh, I, and another college. Um, but they studied farm worker families for 10 years in the Salinas Valley. And they found a correlation between the number of sulfur applications in a field and reduced lung function in children living a half a mile away from the application sites.
That's a long
So, you know,
distance for for drift.
yeah, well, yeah, so it's drifting and there's a
But it's
number
not
of
the sulfur itself isn't drifting, is what you're saying. It's the sulfur dioxide,
well,
the
or and sulfur vapor. So the
and
vapor is a
sulfur vapor.
gas too. So that can drift and so can the sulfur dioxide. But the sulfur dioxide's the real lung irritant. And it turns out that, we all think we know what sulfur smells like, but
Right.
sulfur has no odor.
Uh-huh.
It's zero odor. And sulfur vapor, zero old odor. So if you've ever smelled sulfur in the field, what you're actually smelling is going to be the sulfur dioxide.
Hmm.
Now, you can go some places and get a real foul, rotten egg, outhouse type of smell. That's going to be hydrogen sulfide gas, but that only occurs during anaerobic conditions, and it requires biology for
Right.
that reduction to take place. So if you're smelling the burnt match type of sulfur smell in a field, that's sulfur dioxide.
And that the what is it that is sunlight triggered, or that reaction, or just
Well,
heat
so
or
it's just
temperature?
temperature
Just
related.
temperature.
So, you know, th- a researcher many years ago at like UC Berkeley was studying sulfur sublimation. And he studied it between 25 degrees Celsius and 100 degrees Celsius. So it takes place fairly readily. And the warmer the temperature gets, the higher the sublimation rate.
Mm, got it.
And actually, the higher the temperature would drive the oxidation rate as well. And UV light would help drive that oxidation rate. And if you had ozone, like pollution, that would just make the oxidation rate go super fast. Um, so, so there's various forces that would drive the oxidation, and temperature would be the main one. And then if you like went to the University of California integrated pest management pages, um, and grape growers, and for any grower, that's great resource. But they have their powdery mildew models where they're designed to help growers time their applications for when to start applying pesticides to control powdery mildew.
Right.
And one of, they point out there that, if the temperature is over 85, you got to worry about burning leaves because of the oxidation rate is so high.
For
And
sulfur, you mean? Yeah.
and that's, yeah, from the sulfur vapor oxidizing.
Wow.
And the only thing that's going to oxidize is to sulfur dioxide.
Right. Right.
And that can go further to some aerosols that have more oxidation, but the sulfur dioxide would be the one that really piques my interest because I know that's a Prop 65 chemical.
Right. For California. So for anybody that's not in California, how would you describe Prop
Well,
65?
it's a list of chemicals that are known by the state of California to cause either reproductive harm or cancer.
Right.
Now, sulfur dioxide is linked to reproductive harm. And if you can the PDF of their findings is readily available on the internet, and you can read the whole thing. That actually the introduction's really easy to understand, the summary. um, and then if you wanted to break it down more, you take it and plug it into chat gpt and ask it and you can query that study with chat gpt if you really want to delve into it quite a ways and have it explain things that maybe you don't quite understand. But a few of the things that are of note is like, say, reproductive reduced fertility in men and women is documented to occur at about 15 parts per billion. So
Wow.
that's not much. Um, and your nose can only detect it like maybe 0.75 parts per million. So
Got it.
parts per million, that that's a thousandfold higher concentration than a part per billion.
Right. And
So
so, what if I just before you move on, just to clarify, so what you're saying is the active ingredient when we put sulfur on our grapevines is not sulfur. The active ingredient, like the thing that we actually, the intention of doing that is so that it will sublimate into sulfur dioxide
well,
because
that yeah, that to
that is the
sublimate
toxic
into
thing.
sulfur vapor and sulfur dioxide. The sulfur vapor may have some
Okay.
pesticidal activity as well,
Okay.
but it's a
Got it.
gas and it's going to drift and it's ultimately going to oxidize to
So we're actually like gassing powdery mildew
yeah,
and
which is
mites and stuff like that when we apply sulfur.
yeah, ultimately that's what's happening.
Okay.
Is you're creating a gas and it's a controlled release gas, so if you
Right.
and what makes it really, the sublimation is actually pretty slow of sulfur at ambient type of temperatures. um, if you were to just throw a block of sulfur out there, it would 100 years later it'd probably still be there. But
Okay.
when you start milling down a 10-pound cube of sulfur into 3 micron sized particles,
So this
you
is the micronized sulfur that you
so
can
yeah, now
the
it's
wettable sulfur.
micronized, and you've
Yeah.
increased the surface area of that 10 pounds over several million times,
Right.
by milling it down like that. So now it actually happens fairly quickly.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
so it's and that's another reason why, if you wanted to acidify the soil, say you're using it for acidifying your soil, you really should incorporate it into your soil, and then
Right.
that way the microorganisms there can uh, convert it, into
Like
the
sulfuric
acidic,
acid, I guess, right?
yeah, and acidify your soil. Otherwise, if you just sprinkle it on top, uh, you know, a given amount, perhaps even most of it, is going to just vaporize and gas off. You won't get nearly the effect that you want. So
Gotcha.
even if you aren't using it for pest control, it's best to incorporate uh, fertilizer type of sulfur into the ground as well.
Gotcha. So, do we know how, like, I mean, you mentioned sulfur vapor as well as sulfur dioxide. And I think that kind of some of the things you were pointing out is like sulfur dioxide is a highly regulated, very toxic gas. And so if we knew like there's almost like a loophole in the application of sulfur because sulfur itself isn't that, but then it almost immediately, as soon as we spray it on a generally, like a normal California warm day or whatever,
Well,
we're
yeah.
actually creating a lot of sulfur dioxide. And I think you have some really interesting math about the way the weight of that, when we add, like a certain amount of sulfur, actually, that when it
Well, yeah,
sublimates,
if you
how
add
much
a couple
heavier
of
it gets.
oxygens to it, you double the mass.
Right.
Uh, and in California, sulfur uses for pest control is trending downward a little bit, but I
Uh-huh.
think the last in 2023, the last results that are available from the pesticide use reports, it was like 39 million pounds or something like that. I
Still the highest used
Yeah,
pesticide,
still
probably.
by far. I mean, by far the most widely used pesticide. The state of California says copper is the most widely used fungicide, but then they're also saying sulfur is the most widely used pesticide, which is also a fungicide.
Right.
But
So, yeah.
yeah, so those are two of the most used pesticides in California, anyways, and I imagine it's pretty similar in the rest of the country. I think really the second most widely used in California was the petroleum oil.
right? Style it, probably, if that's the
Yeah,
brand
you
name.
know, the ultrafine type of horticultural oils, and really collectively all those.
How
Uh,
is, I mean, I've always thought that it's weird that that's an organically allowed things. Again,
well,
like
again, you know, I
it's
mean,
like
they
highly
made an exception.
refined oil, right? It's oil. It's like mined like this is like the
Yeah,
fossil fuel industry once again, right?
yeah, you know, and I think it's a shame because, I mean, when you have the three most widely used pesticides used by organic growers are petroleum oil, sulfur derived from petroleum oil, and copper sulfate, which is mined with sulfuric acid. Um, you know, I just, to me, that's a little bit of a problem. And
Yeah.
then they're not the safest pesticides either. I mean, if you use, most synthetics aren't going to gas off and move into your neighbor's yard. Um, you know, um, and you know, the copper sulfate or the copper products that, you know, they're there's a number of, they're related, they've been tied positively to, say, Parkinson's disease.
Which ones have been?
The copper compounds.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a group down in UCLA that have been studying this since, I don't know, the early 2000s, and they've looked at data going back to 1977 through the pesticide use reporting system, and then they've uh, you know, correlated, you know, many pesticides. They've looked at pretty much all the pesticides and to see what correlations they can come up with. But let's say their Parkinson's sort of rating for these copper compounds is kind of on the moderate side. So increasing Parkinson's in these farming communities by 20 to 70%, where
That's
there's a few organophosphates that actually doubled, you know, the um, Parkinson's rate. But so it's not as bad as some of those organophosphates. But you know,
right.
it's, you know, my dad actually died of Parkinson's, so you know, it's not anything I want to I see
Per-
somebody have the quality of their life degraded the way my father's quality of life was degraded.
That's
You know,
very understandable. And I want to be clear. I'm in no way, I mean, I think it's really important to talk about all this. I'm not trying to push people to synthetics by
oh
any
well,
stretch. I mean,
I'm
maybe
not
you are, but
either.
I'm an advocate for doing much less of everything and finding ways to farm that allow you to use less of everything.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm kind of, I want to do what's practical and it's going to be best for the long term. For me, it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be,
yeah,
and I don't want to be hurting my neighbor, and I don't want to be hurting myself, and I don't want to be hurting my kids. Um, you know, so I think that's what we should work for. And you know, I think, you know, like the potassium sorbate, it is a natural substance,
well,
but
wait, we haven't gotten to that. You just
yeah,
jumped
I
into that.
know. I'm
So
just,
we're now we're talking alternatives. So yeah, I mean, this is really good stuff. I before we jump into potassium sorbate though, I wanted to just ask, like, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. Obviously, I mean, people can look up what you do and that you have these other products that are alternatives. And so if you were going to play devil's advocate against your own argument to help convince people it's not just about you selling a product, what could you say about sulfur and the way that interacts with the world, that is there a good devil's advocate argument against what you're saying? Like, I mean, you mentioned it breaks down into sulfur vapor as well as that, and then it can, as well as sulfur dioxide, and then it can break down. I mean, when I say break down, I mean just like sublimate, and then it can sublimate further. How big of a concern is sulfur dioxide in that whole spectrum of things that sulfur can become, and how long can it persist? Is it just a temporary phase? Well, that's it for now. If you are not a paid subscriber, if you'd like to become a paid subscriber to get full access to this and all the content at Beyond Organic Wine, you can easily do that at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. Thank you so much. And here's a little music from Colden Pro. A big thanks to him for this.